Donald Trump's first month as United States President brought real chaos to both United States domestic affairs and international politics. It's not the end of the world, but it is the end of the world order as we know it. Trade wars, talks with Putin, and Trump's team meddling in European politics. Where is this all heading? Is America's global standing at risk? Trump kicked off his second term by shaking up the world order and America's domestic policy. No surprise there. Many European leaders already knew Trump was an agent of chaos. His rise to power made the US an unreliable partner. His defining trait is unpredictability. That can either help the West or play straight into Putin's hands, like we saw in recent talks. It's like roulette in a casino now. Trump's words and his actions rarely match. His statements live in the moment. Tomorrow they may mean nothing. One day he starts a trade war with Mexico and Canada. Next he pauses tariffs. He warns Hamas that hostage-taking will have consequences. Then the next day he says it's Israel's problem. Hey, I'm not only bashing Trump. In chaos there are great opportunities for the wise. For those who know how to navigate the chaos. Perhaps Trump knows exactly what he's doing, perhaps he doesn't. This will only be seen through time. Right now, one thing is certain, he is preparing the chaos. Hello my friends, my name is Artur Rehi and I am from Estonia. In this video I will give you the tools necessary to be able to communicate with the Russians. It's nothing too complicated, but you gotta hear it to understand it. Also, these videos are possible thanks to Buy Me a Coffee monthly members. So, to show my gratitude, I'll be butchering 5 names with my Estonian pronunciation. Let's go. Samuel Vood. Urgentemente. Juan Gle. Andreas. Oh, there's only 4 names. Damn it, if you wish to be the 5th name to be butchered like this, become a monthly member of Buy Me a Coffee. Links in the description below. My friends, sometimes we joke around in Estonia that it matters more to Estonia who is the president of the United States than who is the president of Estonia. Well, talking about that, Trump agrees to pause tariffs on Mexico and Canada after they pledged to boost border enforcements. This is Ground News, #1 news comparison site of the world, and it's a great tool. There's a difference of agenda on the center, the left and the right, and you can keep an eye on it if you want to. This news is massively covered and you can see it, 552 news sources. You can see the bias distribution, left 29%, center 44% and right 27%. And you can see the factuality, which is one of the most important tools. We got 68% high factuality and something I don't see quite often, which is very high factuality. Wow, 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 this is where I want my news. By the way, a good combo. You can go to the ownership, find any kind of owner you would like your news source to have. For example, 10% independent news. You'll find those news houses, and the 14% high factuality, you find who has independent ownership and very high factuality. Everything is right in front of your eyes to make sure you don't get garbage. Why I cover this story now is because it is very much connected to the well-being of my country, Estonia, part of the European Union that Trump has threatened to tariff the hell out of. But if you don't want to follow this news, then you can make up your own homepage here. Click for you, and here you can make up the topics you want to see. For example, I have Ukraine and Ukraine war. I click them both, and now I only see these news connected to these 2 topics and nothing else. By the way, my friends, for a limited time, you can get the same plan I use every day for nearly half the price. Just go to ground.news/Artur or scan the QR code on the screen to get their unlimited access Vantage plan for just $5 a month. Or gift it to someone you know and have more informed conversations. Call out one-sided narratives and think critically about stories shaping this world. I only promote brands I vet, and I think you find Ground News as valuable as I do. Thank you, Ground News, for sponsoring today's video. One of Trump's big plays for history is ending the war in Ukraine. The real danger isn't Trump himself, but his team. They might cut the deal with Putin over Ukraine and Europe's heads, But Europe is catching on. European leaders will meet in Paris in late February to discuss boosting defense spending and support for Kyiv before any peace deal is made. The message? The United States isn't helping. It's time for Europe to take charge. While the US says the EU should handle its own issues, Trump's allies like Elon Musk and JD Vance are pushing Russia's propaganda, interfering in EU politics. They back far-right politicians and accuse Europe of being undemocratic. That is funny considering the EU leads in press freedom, free speech and, well, democracy itself. I mean, the Greeks invented it 2,000 years before the United States even existed. Meanwhile, Trump's administration echoes Kremlin's talking points, suggesting elections in Ukraine and questioning Zelensky's legitimacy. But let's be clear, Putin is the illegitimate one. Ukraine's constitution itself bans elections during martial law. Article 19 of the Constitution of Ukraine explicitly states no presidential, parliamentary or local elections can take place. So legally, there's zero issue with Zelensky staying in power. Zero. Ukraine was attacked by a dictator. Pressuring Ukraine to hold elections ignores both its constitution and the fact that 20% of its territory is occupied. Elections in Ukraine would go directly against its democratic constitution right now. So to demand these elections is to demand the country to drop its constitution. But what does Russian constitution say about Putin? Article 81, clause 3 states, no one can serve more than 2 presidential terms. No matter how much Putin tries to reset his count, his 3rd term in a row is unconstitutional. But in Russia, the constitution is just for show, used to silence opponents. And yet, the United States is legitimizing Putin by deciding Ukraine's fate behind its back. Trump's administration on Ukraine is just Biden's policies with extra chaos. Afraid of escalating tensions with Russia, Biden's team minimized aid to Ukraine and pressured it not to strike Russia too hard. This wasn't just about restricting usage of weapons. The United States reportedly stopped Ukraine from wiping out 10,000 Russian troops near Kherson, instead letting them retreat. And remember that F-16 crash in 2024? Turns out it may have been caused by a disabled Link 16 friend or foe system. Ukraine never officially confirmed the cause, but the Wall Street Journal reported the US removed Link 16 from the jets before delivery. Why? Biden's excessive caution. Same with Patriot missile systems that were sent to Kyiv. As a result, top Ukrainian pilot Oleksiy Mezi died. This is just one example of the United States fearing Ukraine's victory. Biden hid it, Trump says it out loud. But the USA still didn't send any of the F-16s and all deliveries were provided by European countries. Le Monde writes that Greece will send all of its decommissioned 32 F-16 aircraft to Ukraine. Previously, there was a plan to send them to the US for upgrades before shipping, but now the planes will be transferred directly to Ukraine. Damn it, you know what? I'm done with people being afraid of Russia. Finland, you up for it? We gotta make a new alliance of Estonia and Finland. Let's make the snow speak Finnish again, damn it. They have forgotten how it's done in the West. According to BBC, pro-Kremlin outlets push the idea that Ukraine's future is being decided in Washington and Moscow, leaving Kyiv sidelined. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov confirmed Ukraine would participate in talks, but the main negotiations would be between Russia and the United States. This is a classic Russian strategy, minimizing Ukraine's role and focusing on big players. Yet even Russian analysts aren't sure how Trump will act. Some are optimistic, others worry he could use talks to pressure Moscow. Let me let you in on a little secret how to communicate with the Russians. They speak a different language, yes, literally, but also figuratively. They get different feedback from when you are polite with them. If you are polite to a German, he will be polite to you. Hey, very nice. If you're polite to a Russian, he will see that you are weak and he can take your wallet, your land, or anything from you, whichever relationship you have with him. Applies in business with the Russians as well as battlefield. Russians will love you, but you gotta kick their asses first. Shh, Don't share this. It's Estonian-Finnish secret knowledge. Don't share it with the world. It's not for wide circles. Since 2022, Russia has claimed it's open to negotiations on its own terms. By 2024, after gaining military ground, Putin set specific conditions for peace. They include, and I'll read them to you, Ukraine withdrawing from Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson and Zaporizhia. International recognition of these territories and Crimea as part of Russia. Ukraine's formal rejection of NATO membership and the lifting of Western sanctions. By the way, Russians always claim, and the officials always claim, oh, these sanctions, they don't hurt us, they're just weakening the West, we're fine. But why do they want the sanctions to be lifted so bad then? Ukraine straight out rejected these demands, calling them a Hitler-style ultimatum. Western countries saw them as unrealistic, but in Russia, they were framed as constructive step towards resolving the conflict. Pro-Kremlin media emphasized that Ukraine's refusal to negotiate would only worsen its position. However, even among Russian military bloggers and analysts, doubts emerged about the feasibility of these conditions. Some commentators outright stated that they were more of a tactical delay than genuine peace offer. Analysts like Alexander Baunov point out that Putin appears to have shifted from ideological rhetoric to pragmatic demands for control over Ukraine. Russia's stance is no longer based on denazification like in the first or second year of war with all the propaganda, but rather based on territorial gains and strategic security guarantees. Nevertheless, these demands remain completely unrealistic, leading experts to suspect the Kremlin of trying to prolong the conflict. Well, of course they gotta prolong the conflict. Their entire economy is now dependent on war. Without it, it would just collapse.
Putin is interested in continuing the war because he still believes he can win. Additionally, the war helps him tighten control over the Russian population. He may also fear the prospect of hundreds of thousands of soldiers returning from the front lines, as they could easily start forming gangs and hold the government accountable for all the deprivations and deception.
Russian authorities likely hope that over time Ukraine will find itself in a weaker military and political position, allowing Moscow to dictate even more favorable terms. Examining Kremlin's rhetoric, it becomes clear that its claims of willingness to negotiate are more about strategic pressure than actual peace efforts. Russia's demands are too extreme for Ukraine or the West to accept, making a quick peace deal unlikely. Russia seems to be betting on further escalation or waiting for favorable international shifts. As a result, the war is expected to continue, with the negotiation process remaining an element of information warfare and political maneuvering. Russian officials are increasingly signaling a readiness for negotiations to end the war in Ukraine. Publicly, the Kremlin has become more specific about what kind of peace agreement it seeks. However, some analysts doubt that peace talks are currently Moscow's top priority. They believe that Russia is still demanding excessive concessions from Ukraine or from the West, a sign that it may simply be stalling for time to enter negotiations under more favorable conditions. Again, I gotta go back to it. There is a way to negotiate with Russia, but for that to work, experts need to give some guidance, because at the moment Western politicians are failing miserably on this. They simply have no proper education or experience on dealings with the Russians. It's a simple rule. Repeat after me. You got to kick their ass first. Then you can talk, and they will love you for it. Russians love a stronger enemy. They despise a weak one. Western politicians, why you gotta beat the weak one, huh? Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov told Channel 1 on February 13th that one way or another, of course, Ukraine will participate in the negotiations, but stressed that the dialogue will primarily be bilateral Russian-American track. Trump's representative, Keith Kellogg, stated in Munich that the US does not believe peace talks with Russia should include European leaders. European leaders were not invited to negotiations in Saudi Arabia. This is yet another example of condescension from United States administration. How can a war in Europe be discussed without Europe at the table? Many Russian media outlets interpreted this as a signal the beginning of conflicts resolution talks, primarily between the two geopolitical superpowers. Some headlines in popular Russian newspaper says, I quote, "Zelensky is panicking. Trump is preparing to carve up Ukraine like a herring." Or, "Putin has broken through the Iron Curtain imposed by the West on Russia." Or, "Putin scored a diplomatic victory." End of quote. Pro-Kremlin TV channel NTV aired reports suggesting that after Trump's conversation with Putin, Kyiv's position was undermined and European allies were excluded, leaving Russia and the United States to decide Ukraine's fate. NTV correspondent Alexei Veselovsky said, and I quote, "After talking to the Russian leader, Trump immediately called Kyiv. He spoke with Zelensky for about an hour and later wrote that the conversation went well. But reporters noticed that Trump spoke with Zelensky only after talking to Putin. So when the United States president summarized this day of high-stakes diplomacy at the White House, journalists asked if this meant Zelensky was being sidelined from negotiations." End of quote. Before this, pro-Kremlin commentary on Trump's potential influence over Ukrainian war had been mixed, ranging from hopeful enthusiasm to caution and skepticism. In September, Russian state TV host Olga Skabeyeva told her audience that, I quote, "From Trump's perspective, Zelensky is merely a puppet controlled by Biden and Harris." End of quote. This is a sentiment widely echoed on her show. On a similar talk show on Channel 1 called Time Will Tell, guest Nikita Danyuk speculated that abandoning Zelensky or cutting off aid to Ukraine, Trump might be trying to portray himself as the peacemaker who prevented World War III. However, after Trump's victory, another commentator, Vladislav Shurigin, told viewers that Trump would actually try to force Russia to stop its advance in Ukraine. Both Pskov and Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov made cautious statements, downplaying any potential pro-Russian shift in Trump's policy. Putin, on the other hand, was more conciliatory, publicly congratulating Trump, praising his character and appearing to dismiss the threat of sanctions while reaffirming his willingness to engage in dialogue. But the biggest disappointments over potential negotiations came from Russian war bloggers and soldiers. To them, ceasefire means concessions to Ukraine. Instead of strengthening ties with Europe, the cradle of democracy, the United States is encouraging China and its influence is growing, while tariffs on Western allies and long-term United States partners are imposed, even if temporarily paused. Tech giants like Facebook, X and YouTube have become major platforms for Chinese and Russian propaganda. China is adopting Russian hybrid warfare tactics and applying them aggressively. Algorithms promote anti-American and pro-China content. China and Russia are investing billions in informational warfare, yet there is still no serious effort to counter it in the West. Talks with Putin without Europe, Trump's unclear policies, and his team's support for far-right movements are pushing the European Union towards decisive action. The easy times are over. The United States is stepping away from its role as the leader of the democratic world, the global police force, and the reliable partner. But that is the democratic choice that Americans have made. Is there a threat to American democracy? Throughout history, the country's two-party system has swung like a pendulum, shifting from Republicans to Democrats and back again. Trump's policies will undoubtedly hurt the United States and global economy, but in 4 years there will be another election. Internal US affairs remain a domestic matter, but being a world leader comes with responsibility and courage, qualities that both Biden and Trump have ignored. However, it was Europe's democratic weakness, reliance on cheap Russian resources, and failure to act against Russian wars in Chechnya and Georgia in 2008 and Crimea in 2014 that emboldened Putin. Both Europe and the US ignored the threats of Russia's hybrid warfare for years, despite warnings from countries like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania and Poland and Finland. These nations, once occupied by the Soviet Union, know exactly how to handle Russia. Estonia was one of the first to experience Russian cyber attacks back in 2007. But who listens to small nations, even when they're right? Now, with Kaja Kallas, a former Estonian Prime Minister, as the EU's High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, there is hope. She has the right stance and deep understanding of Russia. Her family was among those persecuted by the Soviet regime. As a baby, her mother was deported to Siberia during the March deportations of 1949. She knows firsthand what the Russian world means and how to fight it. Europe is realizing that if it does not take charge of its own security, no one else will. The old world order has been shattered by Russia and China. The United States has fallen into Russia's influence trap. This is an embarrassment for both the previous and current administrations. How can a country with a GDP smaller than Spain intimidate and influence the decision of superpower like the US? Americans should think carefully about their choices. I leave United States elections to American voters, but the country's global leadership role is too important to ignore. Europe is waking up, though slowly. A European army separate from NATO forces is in development. This will take time, resources and possibly legal changes in some countries. For example, Italian law currently prohibits the use of its military outside of the country. Meanwhile, far-right parties supported by Russia and some of Trump's team members are gaining influence in the EU, like Germany's AfD. Decades without major security threats have made democracies complacent. Many European politicians lack the courage and determination to tackle modern challenges. The advance of autocracies against democracies continues, and the time for decisive action is long overdue. But progress is slow. The US is losing its status as a global leader, and power is shifting to Europe. Without US support, Ukraine would not have lasted 3 years, and we are all grateful. But US could have ended the war in 2022 without talking to Putin by defeating his army early in the full-scale invasion. And that would have really made America great again. The EU could have done the same, but it had neglected defense spending for decades. That is also in the past. The future of Europe, Ukraine and the US is interconnected, whether Trump acknowledges it or not. If the US refuses to take part in shaping a new democratic alliance and excludes Europe from talks with Russia, that is his decision. But this has only united Europeans further. Now, everything is in our hands. A strong, independent Europe and Ukraine's membership in the EU, NATO or any other security alliance are keys to the future stability. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has publicly and explicitly said he would be willing to send peacekeeping troops to Ukraine. This is an example to follow. Britain, we're all waiting for you back in the EU. Together it's more fun. The United States fears triggering Article 5. Which would require intervention. But it seems they have forgotten that when Article 5 was invoked after September 11, 2001 attacks, NATO allies came to America's aid. When it came to fighting a new form of terrorism, this time Russian, the US backed down. In their current form, negotiations primarily benefit Putin. Not only is he being treated as an equal, despite being neither a legitimate president nor anything more than a dictator and terrorist, but placing him on the same level as the US legitimizes him. Meanwhile, Ukraine and Europe are pushed to the sidelines. Russia is running out of options. Its advance near Pokrovsk has stalled. They have no troops left to push forward. The situation remains tough for Ukraine too, near Kurakhove, where Russia still has reserves of armored vehicles and has concentrated its main strike forces. But this is the only area where they are still advancing. Russia's stockpile of Soviet-era equipment is almost depleted, its economy is on the brink, and the central bank chief Elvira Nabiullina is panicking. Any ceasefire would be a concession to Russia and a chance for it to regroup and prolong the war. Russia is now at its weakest point in 3 years, yet it is being offered a way out with minimal consequences. This is why Ukraine and the EU are unlikely to accept Russia's terms. Additionally, Zelensky refused to sign the deal exchanging mineral rights for United States aid. Ukraine is struggling, mainly due to a shortage of trained personnel and weapons. But Russia is in an even worse state. Ukraine can win, even if the United States doubts it. Russia must face more pressure until it collapses. Any negotiations or easing of sanctions would only allow Russia to rearm and attack again. The United States is voluntarily giving up its global leadership role, and the big question is, who will take its place? China or Europe? The future is in our hands. My friends, thank you for watching and thank you for trusting your time with me. I enjoy making these videos for you. If you also enjoy them, then become a monthly member and buy me a coffee. This is the foundation of this channel. Link is in the description below. Until my next analysis, my friends, stay cool and bye-bye. Thank you, Crown News, for sponsoring today's video.